Wani, do you have link to the presentation? Would you mind kicking us off?
I'm unable to access the presentation as of now, but
oh, no problem. We can give it a minute.
okay. Are we good to go ahead? So,
yes, thank you.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining all of us today. And today's agenda, few housekeeping and community safety norms will be entered in the group chat as we talk, and followed by a short introduction about SGP and the work that we do with the communities of practice circles, and the goals for Gender Café that are set out across SGP. That will be followed by a Zoom poll along with the presentations by our speaker and facilitator. And then we'll have a round of question and answers with the panelists. And then we will break out into small focus group discussions in different breakout rooms where the recording will not be there. Then we'll have a short debrief while we rejoin in the main room and with the closing remarks. We sincerely hope that we are able to co-create knowledge today that completely decolonizes and widens our perspectives regarding Dalit activism, and also how Dalit politics operates in workplaces. So I think we can go to the housekeeping rules now. So kindly update your names and pronouns in the Zoom, and you can turn on the captions at the bottom of the screen. You can also use the Zoom chat function for discussion and questions. Kindly refrain from making offensive remarks or something that would be very exclusionary and pejorative. The chat should remain respectful. We will share the recording of the speaker presentations after the discussions in a follow-up email to all the registered participants. I think it is clear enough that respect for privacy and confidentiality is of utmost importance, and mutual respect will be moderated across the entire discussion. And we advocate for fostering a safe and inclusive learning environment. Talking more about the SGP mission. Right. So at SGP, what we expect to do is to co-create knowledge and also disseminate the same regarding intersectional lenses to gender research, and bringing on gender practitioners to help engage with the theory and the praxis gap that is there. So to provide a platform for exchange of gender information and resources and advance gender justice across marginalized communities and centering marginalized narratives into the mainstream discussions. Therefore, strengthening connections between theory, policy, practice, and all of that will co-create network building and co-mentorship and learning from within all of us being here. Proceed to the next slide. SGP's membership and outreach is across more than 53,000 followers on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We have certain less following, so please go ahead and join Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you are there. Our monthly newsletter subscribers continuously engage with us on a constant basis. We have registered members and a very flat tier of pricing when it comes to membership. So kindly do explore Society of Gender Professionals website for that. We have a broad outreach across 81 countries where practitioners, theorists, researchers, and activists join from across all the different countries to talk about intersectional gender practices. As I mentioned before, for SGP membership, you can kindly go and visit the genderprofessionals.org/membership, and the link for this will be in the chat box soon. And you can join all of us in the different communities of circles that we have. We will soon have a research working group that is going to be upcoming. We do have annual dues and solidarity hours. If annual dues are too much of a stretch for you, then maybe solidarity hours are there, because if you're working in gender just organizations, we believe in solidarity and partnerships, and therefore the solidarity hours. And if we can move to the next slide. So this circle is being co-presented by the Ending Workplace Sexual Harassment Circle, along with the other communities of practice circle within SGP. So over to Sri Vidya for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vani. So Ending Workplace Sexual Harassment Circle is co-hosted by myself, Haley and Monialua. The circle is intended to create resources for ending workplace sexual harassment, and our aim is to create safe workplaces and to promote equality. Thank you for joining, and over to Salome.
Thank you, Srividya. This cafe in particular is being co-hosted by both of our circles. So, to tell you a little bit about our employment and peer support circle, it's co-led by me and Violetta, who's also here in the cafe. Our mission is to promote job seekers' resilience and resourcefulness in seeking employment or making career transitions, especially within the gender space. And we co-create spaces to reflect on our career goals and exchange feedback, celebrate our achievements, seek help through our peer support sessions. To join our circle, we'll be adding a small link. You can check out our work and fully join our circle as well. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what SGP Gender Cafes actually do for those who are new to this space. So SGP fosters production and dissemination of applied gender research through these cafes. So these are virtual conversation series that happen at regular intervals, and it helps to connect gender practitioners, academics, activists, and even people who are new to this space. It's a non-hierarchical sharing space so that we all co-learn with each other here. And the goal of these cafes is to also raise the profile of gender expertise when we meet with different kinds of expertise and different kinds of knowledge within these cafes. Next slide. So today's Gender Cafe is focused on generating awareness on the importance of a caste lens in creating inclusive organizations and to foster reflections on what kind of actions people are taking against caste-based discrimination in the workplace and in their own, public and private lives. Our speakers today will be enlightening us based on their own lived experiences as well as the work that they've been doing. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers for this Gender Cafe. Next slide, please. So Christina is one of our speakers today. Christina is a researcher, strategy consultant, and an external relations professional who's worked for over 14 years across South Asia and also the Netherlands. And she's worked with a diverse set of stakeholders in government, business, and the development sector itself. Christina is the co-founder of Dalit History Month Project. April is considered to be Dalit History Month for those of you who do not know this. And she has also published on intersectional discourses between caste, gender, religion, race, sexuality, and mental health. She's currently working on her first non-fiction book on Dalit women and the fullness of life, which we all are excited to read. And you can find links to Christina's writings on her website. Welcome, Christina. Next slide, please. Leena is the founder of Mending the Chasm. She's a trained community mediator and is committed to examining tensions within the South Asian communities and facilitating anti-oppression work, including co-creating the Asian Women Healing Collective and leading a book club focused on dismantling caste oppression. Leena is a settler based in Canada and draws from her experiences as a child of Hindu, Punjabi, and caste privileged immigrants from India. She brings intersectional experiences to her work as a facilitator, strategist, conflict transformation expert, and inclusion advisor. Welcome, Leena, and thank you so much, both of you, for doing this cafe for us. We're super excited to have you here. So before we begin with the panelists. We have a short Zoom poll for you. If you focus on your screens, you'll see some questions pop up. And please take a few seconds to answer those questions. I hope the first question is visible.
Yeah. First poll question is, which factor do you believe plays most significant role in shaping a person's identity at the workplace? You have three choices: education, skills and experience, race, caste and gender, and finally, personal values and beliefs.
Wait for a couple of seconds so that we can record the maximum number of responses. In case you have any difficulty doing this, please let us know in the chat. I'm going to close this question in a bit. We have 27 responses and 40 participants. So I hope everyone can respond. Okay. You will now see another question pop up on your screen.
So this question is about, are you aware of different privileges you have because of your various identities? You have options yes, no, and you don't recognize this.
I'm just going to keep this live for a few more seconds so everyone can answer. Okay. And our last question, this will be a short answer question, so you may have to type. You will see a text box pop up with the question. We'll keep this open for a bit.
So the question is how you have used your privileges at work to support those experiencing oppression or marginalization. You can keep the responses very short and maybe we can take up the discussion later in this event.
Take a couple more seconds to complete our answer. If it helps, you can also answer this in terms of keywords, and later in the breakout rooms and even with the panelists, we can have a longer conversation on this. Okay. I'm going to end the poll now. Great. Thank you so much for answering the poll. It's over to our panelists, Christina and Leena.
Did we want to quickly share the results of the poll?
Right now or at the end? Do you want me to share the results now?
Yeah, sure. We can share them now. Yeah.
Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. Is everybody able to see the results for the first question?
Yes.
So 19% have said that education skills and experience are factors that they believe play a significant role. 56% say race, caste, and gender, and 26% say personal values and beliefs. The next question has 89% of folks saying that yes, they are aware of the different privileges that they have because of their various identities. 89%, yeah. And the last one. I guess this one is showing, will have to be viewed separately on a.
Would you like me to stop sharing my screen so you can share the answers?
No, that's okay. This kind
Yes,
of shows
I
on top of
can
it,
I
but
can
I'm
share
not able
that.
to see the short answers.
I can, Salome. I can share it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um,
Okay. Yes. There are some short answers to this question. Try to support others' ideas and opinions, have a sensitization talk, actively listen, advocate for mental health, make sure that colleagues whose marginalization is different from them, they're centered, adopt an intersectional perspective. Great. Thank you for sharing, Suvidya. Avoid gatekeeping. That's a big one. Thank you. So it's time for our panelists now. Over to you, Christina and Leena.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me here. And I am truly honored and grateful that I get to do this session, especially with Leena, for the work that she's doing, as well as for all of you who've taken the time to be here. Special shout out to Aparna for making this happen. It all started with a session that I attended that was hosted by SGP, and I had to just ask a question on chat, and then the connection happened. And from there on, we've been working on this session. So I'm really glad and grateful that this is happening today. And I hope that this session is course, a learning session, as Salome already pointed out in the goals for the session, but also a session where we are able to interact with each other and engage with this issue. I do realize that we are all functioning within a marketplace of, oppression in a way that, all of us are trying to speak our truth, and all of us are trying to speak up about our oppressions, and it can get a bit overwhelming because there's not just one thing to talk about. There's just a whole multitude of things to talk about, and we all tend to and we are all expected to keep everything and have the equal weightage for every oppression, that a new oppression that we learn about. I recognize that, and it can get a bit too much. But I really hope that this session not only helps us contextualize some of these overarching hierarchies, but also see how overarching hierarchies such as caste and race and patriarchy, for example, sort of just influences how other micro and other singular hierarchies get to be spoken about and come into the focus. The poll questions, of course, did not include a question on how many of you know about caste, but I'm going to assume that some of you do know, but some of you don't at all, because I can see a few names that are not South Asian. So we're going to start off with all of us coming onto the same page about what caste is as a system, and how that expresses itself and translates itself and operates within the South Asian context. And then we will move on to a few aspects about how caste interacts with sexual and gender violence. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, like I mentioned, we're going to start with a primer on caste, and from there on move into how caste works, how caste expresses itself within the workplace. And from there on, we will move into a short introduction into what caste intersectionality is. And from there on, move into caste-based sexual and gender violence within the workplace. So we are just going to start off with the basic structure and sort of build up on how all of these things come together and who really sit in that intersection. To start off with, what is the caste system? This schematic that you see in front of you is the simplest schematic that's available and that's accepted. But this is not to say that caste is as simple as this. Caste is an extremely complicated, multifaceted system that originated in India, is rooted in the religion of Hinduism, but from there on went on to occupy the whole of South Asia and the diaspora, because South Asian communities have migrated into other countries. And it has also found its way into religions, all kinds of religions. And it is now what we have in place is the best way to describe it is that it is a multi-headed monster. And not any of us have been able to control this monster. We are only trying to understand it in the hope that we will be able to curb it, in the hope that we will be able to cut off its limbs. Generally speaking, caste was designed as a pyramid. So on the left side of the slide, you see the antiquity, meaning how it was designed in ancient times and how it looks like in the current times. Now let's start with the left side, that is the ancient times. Now, there are a lot of mythologies based in Hinduism that helps us understand why the schematic came into play, but we're going to cut off that story for today, and we're just going to focus on what the structure was designed to be. So at the top of the pyramid are the Brahmins, who were designated to be teachers, intellectuals, and priests. Those of you who are joining us from the United States, particularly who reside in the East Coast or who know the East Coast, might know of this term that's used called Boston Brahmins. So the word Brahmin essentially comes from the Indian caste system. Some of you might have seen the brand called Brahmin, who sell these really fancy bags. So if you go onto their website, you would notice that the word Brahmin, essentially, they say that the word Brahmin refers to someone who's cultured. So all of those concepts and all of those ideas come from this basic concept of the Indian caste system. Now, followed by the Brahmins, that is the topmost varna or the topmost order, we have the Kshatriyas, who were supposed to be warriors, rulers, anything to do with power, anything to do with royalty, anything that will show off their physical strength, as well as any sort of armor. All of that would be contained within the Kshatriya order. Following the Kshatriyas are the Vaishyas, who were typically designated to be merchants, businessmen, traders, craftsmen, goldsmiths, anyone who's handling wealth, who's creating wealth, who is involved in business, trading, all kinds of that would fall within the Vaishya category, which is why even today you would notice that a lot of the businesses in India and South Asia are essentially done by those who belonged to the Vaishya class or who belong to the Vaishya class, the Vaishya order. Now, below the Vaishyas are the Shudras. Now, the Shudras are those who are designated to do manual labor, farming, fishing, anything that requires, physical labor, anything that is arduous, anything that is strenuous are supposed to be done by the Shudras. But we have to know that the Shudras are still not the people who are designated to do the most impure, polluting jobs. That is referred to those who are sitting outside of the caste system, in other words, formerly known as the untouchables and who are currently known as Dalits. You might have heard Vani mention the word Dalit. So Dalit is a term that the untouchables have taken on to themselves because, of course, who wants to be called as an untouchable, right? So these are the communities who are designated to do the most menial of jobs, such as manual scavenging, which is a very ugly and a very disgusting sort of a work wherein human beings are expected to clean the excreta of animals and other human beings, and that's termed as manual scavenging. We also have the disposal of animal carcasses and other kinds of human waste or dead bodies of human beings. All of those jobs are considered impure in the Hindu or the Indian caste system, and therefore that's relegated for this group of people known as the untouchables, or now known as the Dalits. We also have the Adivasis, who are indigenous populations or forest dwellers. They are currently known as both Adivasis, as well as indigenous populations. We sort of use that term interchangeably. Now, let's move to the right side of the slide, which is essentially the current official classification that the Indian government has given to, its population. And that essentially goes by general category, which includes the upper caste, that is only the first three varnas or the first three orders, followed by the other backward classes, which includes all of the Shudras, the physical laborers, and finally the scheduled castes, which is equivalent to Dalits or formerly known as the untouchables, and scheduled tribes, which are otherwise known as the Adivasis or the indigenous populations. Now, just because these official classifications exist does not mean that it has in any way replaced some of these old terminologies or old classification. Both the official classifications as well as the old categories coexist at the moment today in India and the rest of South Asia. It is also true that this entire schematic is not true of every state in India and every country in South Asia. It has its variations. But overall, the schematic is true, that you have the Brahmins, the upper caste, who are part of the caste system. You have the middle castes who are doing the physical labor, and you have the outcasts who are outside of the caste system involved in polluting types of labor. Moving on from that, a lot of information, let's look at what are some of the attributes of caste as a system. Now, I don't want to get too much into the detail of it because some of it will come through while we are presenting, as well as what Leena has while I'm presenting, as well as what Leena has for us. But typically speaking, caste is determined at birth. One of the common questions that we hear of those who are of non-South Asian origin is, can you move up the caste ladder? The answer is no, you cannot move up the caste ladder. If you're born a Dalit, you die a Dalit. If you're born a Brahmin, you die a Brahmin, which is also one of the reasons why caste has been so extremely durable. That takes us to the second point, which is that caste is a socio-religious hierarchy. It is not just a social hierarchy. Social hierarchies are found across the world, including the United States, in Nigeria too. You find social hierarchies in Europe and in the UK. Across the world, it has its own sort of variations. But caste is unique in the sense it's a socio-religious hierarchy. It is sanctioned, religiously sanctioned. It is mandated by Hinduism. Assignments of rights are graded, as you saw in the pyramid. Depending upon where you sit in the pyramid, your rights are also graded, meaning if you are one of these upper castes, you have full access to education, capital, resources, land, whatever it may be. And then depending upon, where you are in the lowmost rungs, you have some access or you have no access at all. Caste is a very old system, but it is also an extremely resilient system. And what that means is that it has found its way to adapt with other systems. So caste is pre-colonial. You might have heard from other South Asians or other, South Asian, you might have seen other South Asian perspectives or or other sort of, opposing perspectives that say that the British brought in the caste system, which is not true. Caste is a very, very old system. It's close to 2,000 to 3,000 years old, but it is also a very adaptable system. It was pre-colonial, and then it worked with colonialism. It worked with independence, India's independence. It works with capitalism. It works with Christianity. It works with all kinds of interventions that have happened in the last many decades in India and South Asia. It is practiced across religions, geographies, traditions, domains, and communities. So the South Asian diaspora is significant in South Asia, in Canada, in the US, in UK, in parts of Europe, in the Caribbean, in South Africa, in parts of Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. And in all of these places, caste is practiced in some form or the other. Even the indentured laborers who were taken by the British East India Company into the Caribbean follow the caste system. Caste is also practiced in overt and covert ways. So it's not always about visible evidences of how caste works. It's also about how covert it is. And those of us who belong to the South Asian communities or South Asian tradition know how to identify people's caste. Oftentimes we hear this question that, how do you know someone is of another caste? How do you say that what happened to you is caste based or is by virtue of caste? It's because caste is so part of our consciousness. It's so part of it's so part of us that we have learned, even though we are not always able to articulate, but we have learned how to identify people's caste based on caste markers, right? It could be a religion, it could be one's religion, it could be one's surname, it could be one's skin hue, the hue of one's skin color, it could be the hair texture, it could be the shape of your nose, it could be a host of things that will signify a person's caste, and from there on, caste discrimination is practiced. Moving on to the, how caste translates itself or how caste operates is you have the upper castes on the left and you have the Dalits and the Adivasis on the right. And they both come together in the ways they practice caste, right? Like both sides practice caste, both sides engage with caste, both sides are affected by caste. The question is how, right? Affected or affected, as the case may be. So in the case of upper caste, caste is necessarily a thing of privilege, right? Which is, you would have noticed a question that was asked for you in the poll as to, have you used your privilege at the workplace? So within the South Asian context, or amongst South Asians, or interpersonally between South Asians and non-South Asians, upper caste hold on to caste privilege and they use it and they leverage it and they show it in every way possible. They hold the most power, they hold the most capital, all kinds of capital. They also have a lot of access to all kinds of resources. While Dalits and Adivasis are often affected by caste, are facing the consequences of caste, which is caste-based atrocities, discrimination, exclusion, the way your life options are determined for you, poor high maternal mortality rates, poor health outcomes. All of these are examples of how life options are curbed for Dalits and Adivasis. We also have a whole set of caste-based microaggressions at play. Both of these communities practice caste by way of culture, preferences, relationships, beliefs, behavior, and language. In the interest of time, I feel like I'm taking too much time with just helping us understand what caste is. I'll just highlight a couple of things on this slide, which is how caste discrimination works, how caste discrimination translates at the workplace. What's really relevant for this community, hopefully, is the bit around employment practices and products and services, right? What community impact and third parties are mostly relevant to, huge corporations who are involved in any sort of utility services or, energy services. While in the case of employment practices, it applies pretty much to all of us in the way we recruit, in the way we promote, in the way we recognize potential and talent. Products and services, a good example of this would be Airbnb, wherein, the management of Airbnb, if they are not aware how upper caste homeowners are giving away or not giving away, then that's discrimination. An example of this would be upper caste homeowners saying that, they will only rent out their apartments or rent out their houses to vegetarians. within the Indian or the South Asian context, vegetarianism is proxy for upper caste. So that translates to caste-based discrimination. Microaggressions, as in the case of race-based microaggressions, we also have caste-based microaggressions. Typically speaking, there are three types of microaggressions. We have micro-assault, we have micro-insult, and we have micro-invalidation. In the case of caste, micro-assaults are easier to sort of identify, while micro-insults and micro-invalidations are not. And the typical ways in which caste-based microaggressions happen, and something that I've heard often is, you don't look Dalit, because in people's minds, Dalit is equated to a stereotype. They expect a Dalit person to look a certain way, and therefore because of the way I speak English, or because of the way I dress, because of the things that I've had access to, I don't come across as Dalit, and I've often been told that. There are much worse things that happen to other Dalits who are very readily seen as visible Dalits. They are told that they are diversity hires or reservation people or quota candidates, meaning they don't have any merit. So all of this has been happening for a very, very, very long time within the South Asian context, and as well as among South Asians, as well as when, non-South Asians interact with us, because their idea of South Asians are almost always upper caste South Asians. That's who they consider as the model minority, so to say. So this has been just happening for so long that to the extent that it has been normalized. This one slide requires a bit of understanding, so I'll just take a little bit time to explain this. We've all heard the term intersectionality, and we have spoken and we have tried to understand how intersectionality reveals itself within race contexts, within racist contexts rather. And the same thing applies for caste as well. In fact, as far as caste is concerned, it is not as simple as saying caste is one of the many dimensions of intersectionality. Rather, caste is the dominant coordinate. So if you can envision all of us sitting in some sort of a lattice, and each of us are sitting in some sort of an intersection, right? In the case of caste contoured contexts, caste is the dominant coordinate. In other words, caste will either aggravate or alleviate the experiences with gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, and others. In other words, caste and gender are so intrinsically linked among South Asians that Savarna women's bodies are controlled to maintain caste purity. I didn't introduce the word Savarna, but let's say upper caste women's bodies are controlled to maintain caste purity, while lower caste or Dalit women's bodies are considered disposable. Some of you might have seen this poster that came out a few years ago, and it made a huge furore in India when the Twitter CEO was visiting, and he held this poster saying "Smash Brahminical Patriarchy." Brahminical patriarchy might seem like a really complicated word, but it is essentially caste plus patriarchy, or caste into patriarchy, so to say. So you can also call it casteist patriarchy. So that is the way intersectionality works within the caste context. A couple of examples to see how Brahminical patriarchy or casteist patriarchy affects those who are sitting within that intersection of caste, gender, and class, sometimes even religion, sometimes even sexual orientation, right? So two examples. The first example is Dalit factory workers in India. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this campaign called as the Justice for Jayashree campaign that came up in 2021 after the rape and murder of a 23-year-old Dalit factory worker in India. This factory is a supplier of fashion brands, fast fashion brands, in particular, such as H&M and H&M was the one that was being called out during this time. So this Dalit woman was murdered, was sexually assaulted and was murdered. And what they found after that assault was that there was a huge prevalence of sexual violence, that almost all Dalit garment factory workers were being subjected to on the factory floors. So from there on came the Justice for Jayashree campaign, and they sort of uncovered things around, so in India, we have something called as an internal complaints committee, which has been mandated by the Indian government to have in place for, to report sexual violence or to prevent sexual harassment. But what they discovered during this campaign was that a lot of these Dalit women, victims and survivors, had no faith whatsoever in the internal complaints committee, and therefore they had to really suffer silently. And they had this massive global campaign. A lot of people came together, and finally they were able to sign what you call as the Dindigul Agreement. Dindigul is actually a place in Tamil Nadu, a South Indian state, and this is an enforceable agreement, meaning all of the fast fashion brands will have to comply by it and make sure that these Dalit garment factory workers are provided protection and are, given the right kind of redressal mechanisms. Last example, and I will stop here, is that one might think that this is caste-based sexual violence at work happens only in rural parts in Tamil Nadu or rural parts in India or South Asia, completely obscured from the world. But this also happens here. I'm sitting here in New York City, but it happens in the United States. It happens pretty much everywhere else. I would urge all of you to please read this open letter that was written by Dalit women technologists who work out of California in Silicon Valley. And this letter will help you understand what are some of the caste-based microaggressions these women are facing that amounts to both gender as well as sexual violence. And they also report of sexual harassment that happens. And one of the marked differentiators between upper caste women going through, or upper caste South Asians going through harassment at work, and Dalits and Adivasis going through sexual harassment at work is the lack of solidarity from their own women. Right? Not from their own women, lack of solidarity from other women. For example, if a Dalit woman were to undergo sexual harassment, it is not a given that all of the other upper caste women will support her in that fight. Right? So I think this has been one of the market realizations for us as well, even as we navigate some of these workplaces that are ridden by caste. And with that, I will stop and hand over the session to Leena.
Thank you so much, Christina. Cue up my slides here. Okay, and so yeah, building on kind of the deep, the insights that Christina has provided, and I want to acknowledge first that I'm joining you from land that is colonially known as Burlington, Ontario, Canada, the land of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and so grateful to live, play, and work on these lands as a settler. So yeah, kind of picking up from where Christina kind of left off, the approach that I wanted to really lean into was really acknowledging my privilege as a Brahmin, as a caste oppressor category, so to speak, and especially as a diasporan Indian, and kind of what my journey has been to ongoing journey, I should say, as well, that, to really understand my complicity, my ancestral complicity, and the ways I benefited, I continue to benefit from this system, and how can I lean on my practice as an equity practitioner, which I think, having worked in the equity space for over 2 decades, I think it's given me a strong grounding to do my own interrogation, to do my work. And I'm grateful to many Dalit voices. I think about Danmori Sundararajan, her book, The Trauma of Caste, was really, and the work that she has done at Equality Labs was really one of the ways that I began to really have accessible knowledge to start my own work. And so the question that I tend to invite reflection on through my work with communities and organizations as a consultant that I thought would be applicable to this conversation is really, how can we actively speak out against oppression and advocate for change using our power, our privilege, and our platform? And so one of the ways, Christina did a really amazing job at reminding us that these are systems of oppression first and foremost. And so for me, and white supremacy may be an accessible system of oppression for those of you who are new to the notion of caste and its impact. And so I offer a reflection, a quote from Sonia Renee Taylor. She is the author of The Body is Not an Apology. And this quote is from Prentice Hemphill's Finding Our Way podcast, the first episode. And she really talks about, I'll leave you to read it. But what I really find powerful about the conversation that I'm referencing here is that recognition that, the work for all of us is to first understand the way that we internally embody these ladders of bodily comparison that, dehumanize all of us. Those of us who are benefiting at the price of someone's dehumanization. And I don't think you can dehumanize someone else without somewhat becoming dehumanized yourself. And so thinking about, how am I judging myself based on this hierarchy? And our attempt to continue to climb this ladder or preserve this ladder is what keeps it alive. And so just looking at some visuals here that you may be familiar with this iceberg, like most iceberg models, intention is to kind of make transparent that which is invisible. And so you see above the blue line, which is meant to be the water, there are some common expressions that people mostly associate because it's overt to white supremacy as a system. And then what's underneath is covert and often takes more work and analysis to understand that these are contributing to the oppression of people and communities. And so this is, I won't say too much about this, but really want to share the caste supremacy iceberg, which again, similar to what Christina has shared in terms of what are the attributes, how does it show up, what does it look like. I won't spend again too much time because Christina did a great job with animating some of those microaggressions and what it looks like in the workplace. But just for those of you to make those connections between, like, if we can understand the patterns that are present in systems of oppression, we can use our own practices that maybe we're anti-racist, maybe our anti-racist practice is amazing. Well, those practices, postures, and principles can apply to caste, disrupting caste supremacy. So I want to invite that notion that we have the skills and the practices. We just need to get better at discerning and understanding, especially those of us who are part of the system or beneficiaries of this system, to use those skills to do our own interrogation and to build our practice to disrupt and disrupt the harm. And one of the kind of tenets of my work that, when I set containers with communities, is really that the point isn't for this to be a shame and blame process, though shame is a part of, for me personally, as I kind of deepen my own awareness, and like the more I learn, the deeper, kind of the more you learn, there is an element of like, I have to kind of process that feeling of like, wow, like I didn't know what I didn't know. And I allow myself to honor, to hold that, but then I kind of say, that's not the point. The point is to get to the business and the work of dismantling, to use what I'm learning to, when you know better, you must do better. And so, I'm just moving forward. So I've kind of spoken to this, understanding our positionality, that it starts with us, and that we must, when we recognize our privilege and we can understand, maybe I'll share this visual for, again, just to support that understanding of the ways, and this is, building on the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, Sylvia Duckworth, and, in the work I've been doing with clients and communities, I felt the need to add caste because it gave me the platform to speak to that in my communities. or in the spaces I was working. But really understanding positionality as it refers to how our differences in social position, depending on different identities, shape our access to power, privilege, resources. And just again, like that's a part of the work here as well. If you're doing this work in other realms, to remember that our positionality will always be a part of this work and will inform, help us stay rooted in why this is our work to do. And just part of my own exploration, again, I'm making the connection between the personal and professional here, recognizing the way anti-Blackness or a preference for whiteness or an attempt to be adjacent to whiteness to align with that, as a form of protection or continuing to maintain some sort of place in a hierarchy. My work has been to understand the impact of caste and what that means and how that has contributed to what I have access to, understanding shadeism. So that whole, it's an over $1 billion industry globally, and thinking about the way I grew up even in Canada and the comments I would get from family members when I'd go out in the summer and I'd as a kid playing all summer outside, and my family would say things to me like well, don't get dark because nobody's going to want to marry you. And I'm like, I'm 9. I don't know why a 9-year-old would care about that, but so be it. And in just kind of continuing on this visual, part of my work has been to connect and to lead spaces where we align our commitments to equity with equity for the Black community, and recognizing that as long as our Black siblings are oppressed, we are not free. And that's a conversation. I recognized anti-Blackness in my community growing up. It never made sense to me because I'm like in the face of whiteness, they don't differentiate us. And so to kind of to have witnessed the anti-Blackness I did in my community, and now that I continue to disrupt it, it's not easy conversations, but it's necessary. And then I shared just some of those on the bottom left. You may be familiar with these matrimonial ads that you see references to caste, you see references to fairness, and that these are the ways that these are perpetuated and preserved. And then there's that model minority myth, right? Understanding that, that if we just, I think it aligns very much with that bootstrap theory that if we just work hard enough and that's how we're better than. And one of the leaders that I've learned so much from is Resmaa Menakem, that kind of recognition of somatic and embodied approach to healing from harm that comes from systems of oppression. One of the things that he has said is, systems, communities and individuals are not defective. It's systems that are defective. And so recognizing that is kind of, again, a touchstone for me to, when I see how we've been, the kind of divide and conquer approach where we turn on each other and say, well, you're just not working hard enough. And I kind of am clued into systems are the things that are defective, and who is benefiting from our division and who is benefiting from keeping us, kind of turning on each other. And so again, just kind of wanting to animate my own approach to what it is to kind of rise above, kind of what I've been socialized in, and to work to kind of understand what does a pathway forward look like for all of us to be free, for dignity, safety, and belonging needs of each person to matter in the society that we're working to co-create. And so what does caste supremacy look like in the diaspora? So just offering some quotes. And so the first quote is from someone who is caste oppressed, and just kind of talking, and this is someone I've had the privilege and honor of being in conversation with, a Dalit community member who has shared that, when they first arrived with a host of qualifications that were, extremely impressive, but just recognizing how very quickly there was a kind of a questioning of where which caste are you from, or what's your background, and how that was beginning to hold them back. And really just offering my own perspective of like, really, I didn't understand caste. I didn't think it had anything to do with me here in Canada. And that's a perspective that many South Asians who were born in Canada or immigrate at a very young age, there's this narrative of, oh, it has nothing to do with me. And so I'm, as I've disrupted that within myself, it's work that I'm trying to do as well. And just again, I won't, I'm mindful of where we are with time, but just ways I experience privilege in my own journey is not having to consider my caste. I've, my last name being Sharma, for many, that's a clear, for those who are well versed in understanding the system, they'll see my last name and make a whole host of assumptions. And I don't get asked questions like, oh, are you vegetarian? Do you celebrate Diwali, which can be an indication of whether, which caste you are. My language and accent privilege as a Canadian-born Indian. So, it's a privilege, but it's also when I say what ways I experience oppression at work, I get questions, of course, because of race. Where are you from? The assumption that, I'm not from here, that I get, comments like your English is very good. And then, that patriarchal practice from men in my own community. So while I even work to foster conversations about caste in my local community, I've been harmed by men in the community in terms of who have been quite aggressive in response and shut down the conversation. So just moving with a mindfulness that while I may be working to disrupt oppression that I'm privileged by, I'm also continuing to be harmed. So navigating that path and just being mindful of moving in a way that's not at the expense of myself, but just choosing where and when I try and be impactful is an ongoing, I'm going to say, balance. And so I'm going to just see if there's one more thing. And so really, I close my kind of part with a quote, will not end white body supremacy or any other form of human evil by trying to tear it to pieces. Instead, we can offer people better ways to belong and better things to belong to. Instead of belonging to a race, we can belong to a culture. Each of us can build our own capacity for genuine belonging. And so just not to tie it off with a bow or anything, but just again, it keeps me going. It's a source of resource for me to constantly ask myself, what is the future I'm working to build, for myself, for my children, for our communities. So I'll stop there, but thank you for the space to offer this.
Thank you so much, Leena and Christina. We do have some questions in the chat that we can go to now. There is one from Bhavna about, they work with Dalit women's rights in India. And they're acknowledging that they've come across comments such as that those shared by Christina is that, you don't look like a Dalit. And they're requesting that we throw some light on Dalits against Dalits and the violence projected from within the community. So if any of you would like to, or both of you would like to chime in on that.
Great. I'd love to take that question. Thank you so much, Bhavna, for your question as well as for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it. And also thank you for resonating with some of the experiences that I shared. So there are a couple of things that I would like to say to the question that you've raised. It's a really important question. And it sort of reminds me of the question that a lot of white oppressors tend to ask about black on black crime and what do people say to that. As far as caste is concerned, this is where I stand. There are two points to this. One is that just because we belong to a marginalized identity does not mean that we are any less human, right? As human beings, all of us have depending upon who we are and how we identify and what sort of influences we've had in life and what sort of choices we make in life, we either go down the it's not an either or, but we end up being violent or not so violent and completely meek. So I would not necessarily have a spotlight on just Dalits, so to say, and expect them to be any better or expect them to be perfect than other violators. So that's one thing. But the more important thing is, when there is violence that is coming from our own community, it's not that our community has not believed in our own marginalization. So I'm reminded of what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said during one of his interactions, is that an untouchable to the upper caste is an untouchable to the Muslim as well. So I'd like to take that a little bit further and say an untouchable is an untouchable to an upper caste, and an untouchable is an untouchable to an untouchable as well. So when Dalit men, typically, who are most often the violators, but also Dalit women in some cases, when they see ourselves, when they see themselves, and when they see us, they are not necessarily politicized. They're not, all of them are not necessarily politicized enough to think that here is this Dalit person, they are precious and they should not be violated. They are seeing them as somebody who's marginalized and who can be taken for a ride. And it is that borrowing into that caste, it is borrowing into into our own marginalizations, into our own casteist ways of seeing ourselves that leads to that sort of a violence. But just because there's violence happening within our communities it should not in any way sort of make it easy on the upper castes who are committing violence on us and who are in many ways influencing further violence amongst ourselves.
Yeah, I wonder if I could, from a different lens, and Christina, really you were best positioned to answer the exact question, but a kind of segue that I would like to kind of, if it's okay, just speak from a place of recognizing a phenomenon that happens, I'm going to say, in the diaspora around, it's like that whole phenomenon of internalized racism, internalized oppression. I've had to work really hard to understand, for example, again, under the white gaze, when looking at brown communities, and I'll just kind of use brown as a placeholder, where people are like, well, why, how can you be racist to each other? How can you hold? And there is this phenomenon of where because these are systems, right, that live in all of us. It's not a person necessarily. It's a system that we've been socialized into. I think about the way my parents, who were immigrants to this country, who well-meaning, they wanted us to assimilate and kind of mute parts of ourselves so that we could survive in these systems, but not recognizing the message behind that was, you're not good enough, you don't count. And that's internalized. And unless we interrogate those messages and understand the way we see ourselves, yes, and Salome, I see that question. So it could be a whole session in and of itself, because there's that expression that skinfolk ain't necessarily kinfolk, right? And that unless someone has done the analysis, they are not in a position to be an ally, because if you can't be an ally to yourself first and foremost, it's hard to be an ally to someone else. And this isn't about shame. I believe very much, I'm not here to shame my ancestors, and I stand on the shoulders of my elders to even be in this position here to speak the way I get to. It's just having compassion for what they had to do to survive in a system that didn't want them to live, to succeed, to be here. But it's part of the healing work and the accountability work that we all have to kind of navigate to kind of, eradicate this once and for all. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, folks. I'd actually invite the participants, since we have a few questions only, and I'd rather have people say it in their voice. So there are questions from Sophia, Pratik, Salome. Feel free to please unmute yourself and share your question in that order. Maybe some folks have left the call. So I'll read out the questions and you can choose to address the ones that you feel okay to address. What about aggression against Muslims in Gaza and Kashmir? Does it fall into caste hierarchy? Could you talk a bit more on where are you from being an appropriate question? This participant lives in India and understands that this question, this is mainly coming as a curiosity about someone's geography. But I mean, it seems like there can be a hidden agenda there as well when people ask those questions. And then can you throw light on quote unquote DEI work done by Indian upper caste folks in Indian companies or nonprofit institutions and performing allyship and how it causes further harm? So you can take the questions that you feel comfortable taking and would like to respond to. So yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Leena. I'm going to take the third question that you asked, which is, can you throw light on DI work done by Indian upper caste folks in Indian companies / nonprofit performing allyship and how it causes further harm? I mean, we can have a session completely dedicated for how DEIfication and the DEI work that happens world over, but particularly in India, is so problematic, and how they are unwilling oftentimes to talk about things that are the overarching contours of systems within the South Asian context, right? I've written about this earlier, and I will continue to write about this. As far as India and South Asia is concerned, unless and until you start talking about caste, you cannot be doing DEI work. There is no point in doing DEI work. Let me go ahead and say that. There's absolutely no point in doing DEI work if you're not willing to talk about caste. The problem really is that DEI as a practice, as a work stream, is not something that Indian companies necessarily very willingly signed up for. It was only after, multinational companies and other foreign companies sort of started their operations in India, and they mandated that you please have a DEI work stream, because DEI was important within Western companies, within non-Indian companies. So Indian companies were like, okay, let's do it. Like, this is a mandate and we'll follow this mandate. And they just essentially just cherry picked the ones that is most comfortable, or most doable rather. So gender is now a very, very common axis. Like pretty much every other company, every other nonprofit in India and South Asia has some sort of a policy on gender. They have some sort of a policy on sexual orientation and sexual expression. They definitely do have some policy around disability. Some companies talk about, generation or ageism, but close to no one. I could just count the number of companies in my hand, number of institutions in my one hand, who is open to talking about caste. And even when they are open, it's almost always led by, small collectives, or perhaps one or two allies who are anti-caste and who think like, we should talk about caste, and they will have to convince the management, and they'll have to get the buy-in from so many people to just have one awareness session on caste at these institutions. And one of the biggest reasons why there is so much hesitation is because DEI as a work stream is dominated by upper caste professionals, and who are oftentimes castes themselves. They use caste slurs. They are not willing to talk about caste, and they are not willing to talk about their own caste privilege. And oftentimes they're very anti-Dalit. And I have, again, spoken about this, I've written about this. They just do that all the time. And the third part of this, or the third aspect of this, is that now that there is some sort of recognition or some sort of noise that is happening, thanks to the work that has happened in the US, thanks to the Cisco case that came out in California, now that there is some noise that's happening, caste-based DEI is emerging to be an opportunity space. And now upper caste want to leverage that because it's an opportunity space. It's a space where you can leverage some sort of clout. So it's like working as a caste DI professional. It's like working with so many things, all the time, and trying to navigate between these very complicated between these complications to get to the point where we want more representation of Dalits and Adivasis within these companies. We need caste marginalized DEI professionals leading all kinds of work streams within DEI. So those are some of the things that we want, but it's not always what's happening right now.
Thank you, Christina. I'm glad you took that question. Although as someone who is privileged and an upper caste practitioner of DEI in the diaspora, one of the things, in Ontario, Canada, last October, the Ontario Human Rights Commission recognized caste as an area of discrimination. And so that's been groundbreaking here, but still early days in terms of the level of dialogue. So Christina, like you'd said, very few companies, very few practitioners. And really, I've only started kind of more publicly talking about it in recent times because it's been my own journey. And even kind of for this conversation, I know I was like, are you sure I should be the one having this conversation? But I also want to signal that this is not just the work of those who are living the oppression. It's actually the work of those who are beneficiaries to disrupt and dismantle the system. And so recognizing that there is the double-edged sword of those who are privileged, who are trying to preserve this or maintain silence about caste, but also that I do have a couple of other folks where we're committed to equity, and it starts with us. And because this is a part of my positionality, I had to be doing this work. And so I hope in the future that as folks consider equity practitioners to work with, they look at and say, oh, okay, you're South Asian. What's your position on caste? What's the work you're doing? I think that's a way to hold us accountable. I'd like to speak to the question about where are you from being an inappropriate question. And I want to honor that there is nuance that I want to kind of speak to around this question, because as someone who is diasporan and having worked with communities, for example, who have been in Canada, who are racialized people who have been in Canada for several generations, and I'm a child of immigrants, so I was born here, the first kind of my lineage to be born in Canada. And so on some level, like I have this dichotomy of this is home, but also, India as an ancestry source, there's this, home feeling of home. But at the same time, when people ask you, Dane and Dale, where are you from? It's this idea of who is Canadian. So it's a form of othering and I've had conversations with folks who've been here for generations. So when you're, depending on who you are and what body you're in, you're going to receive that question differently. And so what I've experienced in work with immigrant and newcomer communities in Canada is that when that question is received, there is almost like a oh, you see me, and you're curious about where I'm from. And so I can honor that. What I want to say is we're not a monolith as a community, as a race, so we want to honor that. That really, the thing I tell people about this question is you should have social capital with people. You should have relationship. You should have trust to ask someone, because there'd be times I'd walk into a meeting and I'm sitting down and I've never met half of these people, and we start talking and then they ask me where I'm from and I'm like, you don't even know me. So that's the one thing I would say as a nuance. It's really important to have relationship with community and to ask yourself before you even ask the question, where are you from? Why are you asking it? Because I also appreciate there's times where I meet new people and I'm really curious. Maybe I hear an accent and I'm like, oh my God, I lived in Malaysia for 2 years. And I remember feeling like when I hear the accent, but I also got mindful of my own advice of if I don't have relationship with people, it may not be an appropriate question to ask. So just building your own awareness that don't assume that the way you're asking the question or the spirit within which you're asking it is going to be the spirit within which it's received. So it's just kind of making that, so I'm not going to demonize that question, but just really understand that it can be an instrument of othering people. As well as for some people, it's like, wow, you see me and you're curious. I'm no longer invisible in a community that doesn't really see me. And so that's my complicated response to that question.
Thank you so much, folks. We did have a breakout room activity planned, but given that we are almost at the end of our time, okay, I see. Maybe we can just take any last comments from our participants about what resonated with them about today's discussion. Wani, I see your hand is raised.
I've just had a question about vegetarianism when Christina brought it up. So in climate justice movements, there's this entire wave, at least in Europe and the US, about vegetarianism and like intersectional and also intergenerational perspectives claim to be pro-vegetarianism. But as part of SGP climate justice circle that we have, we fear to present that as a title or even as a theme for discussion, because if you look at from South Asian perspective, it is not just about pro-green movement. It is very much based in religious and caste connotations, and we don't want the discussion to be all just about cows and the sacredness of Vedic rituals. So how do we try to inculcate this perspective that we need to inform the perspectives within, say, Europe or US climate negotiations or diplomacy or whatever, that maybe there are other perspectives and intersections that we need to look at, and it is not that linear or narrative? And are there any groups particularly who are working towards that?
Well, I think there are discourses that are, ongoing with respect to how do we get international advocacy groups, particularly those who are involved in climate justice, to see that, there might be alternative perspectives to supporting and promoting vegetarianism. Couple of things come to my mind. One is that we have to recognize the facts that are in front of us. In the US, particularly within the US, the meat industry is the largest contributor to one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases and all of that. So obviously there is something to be done about industrial meat processing industries. I mean, there has to be some systemic interventions to it. So the question that we must be asking is, I think this is a question, I'm not a scholar, I'm not in any way a specialist in climate justice, but I'm sure there are people who are asking those questions if individual choices of vegetarianism matters, and would that have any sort of an influence, or would that make a dent? And to what extent should this choice be? And also, is it a sustainable choice, given that organic foods and given that vegan foods are generally more expensive and not affordable? So, I mean, these are conversations that needs to happen within the climate justice movement, that is looking at vegetarianism as a possible way to make a dent. Within the South Asian context, of course, what you're saying is absolutely right. I mean, I'm reminded of the time during COVID when, people said you have to keep this distance. There were some South Asians said, oh, this is going to be really easy because, this is part of our culture, not to touch people and all of that. They were in fact like trying to, celebrate untouchability, trying to say that, the South Asian culture is so superior in that sense. I mean, you'll always have South Asians doing this kind of nonsense. But the third part of it is, in terms of your question around, how do we get the the climate justice movement that's very European, that is based in the global north, to see what's happening in, in South Asian context. I feel like there's a lot of upper caste South Asians who are sitting within that climate justice movement itself, and they are all, they're not helping. Their presence is what is stopping from so many of us to bring out this alternative perspective. You'll often find that within these advocacy groups, there'll be at least a couple of South Asians there, doing this work, and they will almost always be upper caste. So I feel like the question should be not just about how do we bring about that awareness, but who are these South Asians that are already holding positions within these climate justice movements that are even based in the global north, and how are they contributing to this conversation? How are they contributing to this conversation that will help them, and that will leverage their own casteist practices, and that will support their own casteist practices with respect to vegetarianism?
Thank you, Christina. And in just that vein, when we were holding a circle regarding this perspective, it was very difficult to find a Dalit woman or a Dalit gender diverse folk to moderate the session. When we had Dr. Dada Sahib Tandage, he's based in Boston, and he's talking exactly about this gender, climate, and
Brilliant.
Dalit activism. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think there might be also something to that conversation about how you can expand climate justice conversations that are not just about vegetarianism. There's also land, there's also water, and there's very limited scholarship into how caste intersects with climate justice. Even that conversation is led by upper caste. So I understand how difficult it is to find a resource person, but it might be a good idea to sort of expand that discussion to not just vegetarianism, but also other environmental aspects.
Thank you so much to our panelists for fielding of so many amazing questions, adding so many more insights as you responded to these questions. There are a lot of notes of gratitude coming into the chat right now. We are at the end of our allocated time for this discussion, so I think we'll have to close now. And I want to extend on the behalf of SGP a lot of gratitude to Leena and Christina for immediately agreeing to do this discussion for the community. And I hope this is first of many that we as a community are getting in this space to learn about caste. And there's a variety of thematic areas that our community members address within gender justice. And as today's discussion has showed, there are important intersections with caste, with so many issues that we are addressing as a community. So I hope we will keep this discussion in our hearts and in our minds and in our activism as we work on the wide range of issues that we do that ultimately will lead to gender justice for everyone. Thank you so much to all the volunteers also who helped put this event together, and obviously to our panelists, and to you, our participants who were so engaged and took out time today to attend this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes,
Thanks,
you.
everyone.